GoForThe2.com in with the College Bowl best picks. If you want to find out all the bowl selections, follow the radio and TV show. Next Saturday, I'll break down all 5 bowl games. Channel 262 Dish Network. It starts at 9 a.m., goes to 12 p.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific. Channel 262 Dish Network or Fantasy Sports Television or Radio Network, Cablevision, Optimum in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, or you could go to YouTube Live, FNTSY, go to their channel, type in College Football Today and stream it at 9 a.m. in the morning Eastern Time. I'll break down all 5 bowl games next Saturday throughout the bowl season to January 6th. But these are the best picks that I'm looking at for the bowl season, so let's jump right into it. Louisville and Mississippi State, intriguing matchup. I think this game comes down to Lamar Jackson going up against freshman quarterback Keaton Thompson that took over for Nick Fitzgerald. When you look at Mississippi State this year, head coach Dan Mullen now has moved on to become the head coach of Florida, will not coach in this ball game. But more importantly, starting quarterback Nick Fitzgerald did get hurt in the Egg Bowl. He gave way to Thompson, who played very well. He completed 45% of his passes, 261 yards, and led that team back in striking distance to almost get the victory against Ole Miss in the fourth quarter. But he's going up against one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in college football, arguably the best this season. Even though Baker Mayfield won the Heisman, you look at Lamar Jackson numbers, unbelievable. And more importantly, this is probably Lamar Jackson's last game as a quarterback in college. Expect him to move on to the NFL. Last year, Lamar Jackson did not play well against LSU. Louisville did not step up. They came out flat and got dominated by Ed Orgeron and the LSU Tigers. That game was played in Florida. Lamar Jackson is from the state of Florida. This is his last actual collegiate game, in my opinion. He's going back to Jacksonville, and I think that's the difference for me when you look at Louisville in this matchup. Nick Fitzgerald was 53% of the offensive production for Mississippi State. That's asking a lot for a freshman quarterback, even with the extra weeks of preparation, going up against a dynamic Louisville offense that's averaging 249 rushing yards per game and right around 330 passing yards per game. And you look at the production of Lamar Jackson. He's completed 60% of his passes, 3,489 yards, 25 passing touchdowns. He's also rushed for 1,443 yards and another 17 rushing touchdowns. I think the speed of Louisville is the difference. I think they have the more complete team at this point in the season with the best player on the field, and I expect Louisville to get a dominating 17-point victory in this bowl game. Moving on, it's another Pac-12 Big Ten battle, another intriguing matchup. It's Washington and Penn State. Penn State this year has not played well on the road. Both of their losses to Ohio State and Michigan State came on the road. This was a Penn State team that was 3-2 overall against the better teams on their schedule. Those road opponents had the home opponents that Penn State played on the road had a combined overall record of 40-21 overall, or a 655 winning percentage. Couple of factors why I like Washington in this ballgame. One, when you look at Penn State from an offensive perspective, they have Trace McSorley, they have Saquon Barkley, but they will not have their offensive coordinator, Joe Moorhead, that has moved on to become the head coach of Mississippi State. So I think that's a critical factor in terms of play calling, going up against a solid offense and defense in Washington. In terms of if Washington can force an up-tempo attack, could put a lot of pressure in terms of Penn State from a play-calling perspective. When you look at Penn State overall as well, offensive line is a major cause of concern. They did allow 28 total sacks as an offensive unit. This is a Washington defense that's very fast, can run sideline to sideline. When you look at Washington overall, they're very solid in run support this year, holding opposing offenses to 128 rushing yards per game. They are physical. They do have 38 total sacks as a defensive unit. They're plus 11 in turnover margin and have held opposing offenses to 34% on third down conversions. When you look at the flip side for Washington, you look at their offensive line has only allowed 16 total sacks as an offensive unit. Penn State enters this game with 38 total sacks and plus 14 in turnover margin, but the way you have to beat Penn State is over the top. The way J.T. Barrett and Ohio State were able to do in the second half of that ball game. I think the better quarterback in this matchup is Jake Browning. When you look at Jake Browning last year, 43 touchdown passes. This year, only 18 touchdown passes, but he's the more complete quarterback in this ballgame with the better offensive line. The better coach, in my opinion, is Chris Peterson. I like the speed of Washington, and I feel that they get a 13-point win over Penn State in this ballgame. I think they're the more complete team. The speed of Washington is the difference. Look for them to dominate this matchup in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. They get a convincing win over the Nittany Lions in this ballgame. Another intriguing battle is Bahamas Bowl. It's UAB and Ohio. What can you say about Bill Clark? He brings UAB to a bowl game after not being in college football. They got rid of the program last year, got it back, and kudos to Bill Clark for getting this team to a bowl to face Frank Solich and the Ohio Bobcats. But I think when you look at the defense of UAB, to me, that's what I like when I break down this matchup. UAB only giving up 188 passing yards per game. I think they can force Ohio to methodically work down the field. When you look at Ohio from a bowl perspective, for some reason, Frank Solich hasn't been able to get a lot out of these teams in bowl situations. He's lost the last 3 bowl games as a head coach for Ohio. UAB, I think this is a team that has bought into the program. They've bought into their head coach, and I like the way they're playing. I think they're there to win this ball game. And when you look at the ball game in the Bahamas Bowl, the last 3 matchups, it started 3 years ago with that wild finish. Cooper Rush to Titus Davis against Western Kentucky. That was Dan Enos' last game as a head coach. He went for 2, didn't get it, then became the offensive coordinator for Arkansas. And then when you look at year number 2, it was Western Michigan getting the victory over Middle Tennessee State. And then last year, it was Old Dominion and Eastern Michigan with Brogan Roback. But I like UAB here in this matchup. I think they have the better secondary. They're able to move the football, and UAB does get a 24-20 win over Nathan Rourke and Ohio in this matchup. Another intriguing battle is Utah and West Virginia. Keep an eye out for the health of Tyler Huntley in this ballgame, the quarterback of Utah. He might play. He might be back from a shoulder injury in this ballgame. I think that's a big upgrade at the quarterback position for Utah. They gave way to Troy Williams at the end of the year, an inconsistent quarterback, but he's still an experienced quarterback that led his team to a victory over Colorado to become bowl eligible. But from a physicality perspective, I give the edge to Utah. Utah's rushing for 161 yards on the ground. And when you look at West Virginia overall, they're a finesse type of team that's not going to be with starting quarterback Will Grier that got hurt against Texas. This is a different type of offense. You saw it against Oklahoma. They were not able to move the football consistently with Chugginoff, their quarterback. They relied on the run, but I think this game is won in the trenches. For me, Kyle Whittingham is a guy that gets his players to play up, especially in bowl situations. He has his teams prepared each and every year. And when you look at Dana Holgorsen last year, he did not have his team prepared against Mark Richt. I like Utah from a physicality perspective. I think they get a gutty win over West Virginia in this ballgame. I think they get a 14-point win over the Mountaineers. They're able to run the football against the front 7 of West Virginia and get a gutty win in this bowl matchup. Another intriguing battle is Oklahoma State and Virginia Tech. Wide open offense led by Mason Rudolph. He does have Justice Hill. He's also got James Washington, J.J. McCleskey. He's got Stoner and Aitman at the wide receiver position. But when you look at that loss at home to Kansas State, mobile quarterbacks hurt the Oklahoma State defense, and that's what I look at when I break down this matchup. Josh Jackson is a mobile quarterback. He's a freshman quarterback, but has played very well this year. 19 touchdown passes, and Justin Fuente seemed to get the most in terms of his bowl preparation last year when he got the win over Arkansas. He made halftime adjustments. Justin Fuente is a solid game planner, and I think they have the better defense up against Oklahoma State's defense this year. When you look at Bud Foster and the crew, this is a defense that enters this matchup +7 in turnover margin. They're giving up 187 passing yards per game. They're able to play man-to-man coverage, and more importantly, holding opposing offenses to 25% on third down conversions. To me, that's the difference. With a mobile quarterback in Josh Jackson, I think Virginia Tech does get a 37-30 win. I like Bud Foster with the extra weeks of preparation. They have the better playmakers on the defensive side of the ball as well that could force Mason Rudolph to work down the field. I like Virginia Tech to get a 7-point victory over Oklahoma State in this matchup. Another intriguing battle is Temple and Florida International. Temple did not play well last year in their bowl game. They lost to Wake Forest, but keep in mind, Matt Rhule did move on to Baylor. When you look at Jeff Collins, down the stretch, he got the most out of this team, especially when he moved to Frank Newtile, the freshman quarterback that has played very well this year. He threw 11 touchdown passes. Temple this year did, over the last 6 games, average 280 passing yards per game, 14 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions. They played much better with Frank Newtile at the helm. More importantly, they were battle-tested on the road. They were 3-3 overall. They're a blue-collar team that's very solid in terms of the defensive tackle position, and I think they're able to run the football and shut down the run against Florida International. And when you look at Florida International this year, they had 3 losses on the road or on a neutral field site. They got blown out in those ball games. They lost those games by an average margin of defeat of 23.6 points per game. To me, that's the difference. I think Temple does get a convincing victory in this bowl game, even though it's played in Florida. I think Florida International has overachieved expectations. Jeff Collins will get the most out of this team. Look for Newtile to exploit FIU's secondary. That's the difference. The speed of Temple dominates. They get a 14-point victory over Florida International in this bowl game. Another intriguing matchup is Missouri and Drew Lock against Texas and Tom Herman. Cause of concern was if offensive coordinator Josh Heupel, the Missouri OC, is going to coach in this game. It looks like he will. He did become the new head coach of Central Florida. Scott Frost and that staff are coaching in that bowl game against Auburn, so expect Josh Heupel to coach in this matchup, but it doesn't matter either way. For me, it does come down to the quarterback position, and I think Drew Lock is hitting on all cylinders at the end of the season. This is a Missouri team that is averaging 311 passing yards per game. They're rushing for 199 yards per game on the ground. Drew Lock led FBS with total touchdown passes of 43. During their 6-game win streak, he threw 26 touchdown passes, 8 interceptions. He has a big play running back in Ish Whitner, along with Roundtree. He has a big play wide receiver in Jamon Moore that can stretch Texas's defense. That's the one way you have to beat Texas, is over the top. They've struggled with teams that could stretch that defense vertically. Texas allowing 256 passing yards per game. I think this is a Missouri team that is playing very well at just the right time. I know Tom Herman, as an underdog, has great success, but I do feel Missouri's the more complete team, and Barry Odom has done a fantastic job in getting a pulse of Missouri. They do get a 13-point win in this bowl matchup. Another intriguing battle is Iowa State and Matt Campbell going up against Memphis. Memphis this year 7-0 at home. They will be playing this game in their home stadium, but some of those wins have come against Southern Illinois, UCLA. We know about UCLA's defense. They allowed 282 rushing yards per game. Another victory over SMU and Navy. So the quality of competition that Memphis beat, not up to par like some of the opponents that Iowa State played. Iowa State did knock off Oklahoma on the road this year. They're 4-2 on the road or on a neutral field site. They beat teams like TCU. They've stepped up against the better teams on their schedule and have faced high-octane offenses. They faced Oklahoma. They faced Oklahoma State. They lost that Oklahoma State game at home in Ames by 7 points. So from a defensive perspective, they understand how to play a 5-wide offense going up against Riley Ferguson and Marcus Pollard in terms of the wide receiver position. To me, that's the difference in this matchup. I think when you look at Iowa State from a defensive perspective, They're plus 11 in turnover margin, and I think a physicality in the defensive trenches is the difference. When you look at the Iowa State offense as well, for me, it does come down to the health of Kyle Kemp. He was hurt at the end of the year, did throw 13 touchdown passes, 3 interceptions. This is an Iowa State offense that's averaging 119 rushing yards per game. They're passing for 279 through the air. But more importantly, when you look at Memphis's front seven, they were terrible in run support. They allowed 196 rushing yards per game and wore down at the point of attack against bigger physical offensive lines. That's where I think Iowa State can have success. I like Matt Campbell in this situation. Look for David Montgomery to break out in this ballgame, and I think Iowa State does have a significant offense and defensive line advantage. Iowa State in the upset by 10 points. They get the victory over Memphis in this ballgame. Another intriguing battle that I'm looking at is LSU and Notre Dame. LSU, from a speed perspective, played very well last year against a mobile quarterback in Lamar Jackson. Dave Aranda, Ed Orgeron did a fantastic job in terms of game planning against Bobby Petrino, and I think that's the matchup as well, going up against Notre Dame and Brian Kelly. This is an LSU defense that's allowing 126 rushing yards per game, but they have the athleticism to run sideline to sideline up against the rushing offense of Brandon Wimbush and Josh Adams in this ballgame. I look at the playmakers for LSU on the offensive side of the ball as well. Darrell Williams, Darius Geis. Darius Geis might be playing his last game. He did rush for 1,153 yards this year, 11 rushing touchdowns, but they have wide receivers like DJ Chark that could challenge Notre Dame's defense vertically. I like LSU here. I think that from a game plan perspective, I give the edge to Ed Orgeron and that staff. And an athleticism standpoint, I give the edge to LSU from a defensive perspective. They'll be able to play man-to-man coverage and force Brandon Wimbush to make his reads and progressions. That's the difference. LSU dominates this matchup just the way they did last year against Lamar Jackson. They get a 17-point win over Notre Dame in this battle. Another intriguing battle is Michigan and South Carolina. Keep in mind, South Carolina fired their offensive coordinator, Kurt Roper, in this ballgame. Brian McClendon will be the game caller for South Carolina in this ballgame. When you look at South Carolina as a whole this year, they've struggled every time they couldn't rush for over 100 yards. They were 1-4 in those ball games and lost those games by 13.7 points per game. Last 4 games of the year, they only averaged 199 passing yards per game, and I did not like the progression of Jake Bentley down the stretch, only 16 touchdown passes. They're going up against a very physical defensive front seven in Rashawn Gary and Michigan that's holding opposing offenses to right in the area of about 135 rushing yards per game, and more importantly, in the secondary, they're only giving up 145 passing yards to opposing offenses. To me, that's the matchup as well. I think they force South Carolina into becoming one-dimensional, and you look at the sack total for Michigan heading into this matchup, 39 total sacks, and more importantly, 26% on third down conversions. I like that matchup. Look for Michigan to run the football on the front seven of South Carolina. They're averaging 186 yards on the ground. Jim Harbaugh, to me, is the better game planner over Will Muschamp. I don't like the fact that he fired his offensive coordinator. Michigan does get a convincing 14-point victory in this ballgame over South Carolina. Another intriguing battle is Western Kentucky and Georgia State. I like Western Kentucky here when you break this game down for a couple of factors. Western Kentucky with their quarterback, Mike White. To me, he's the more complete quarterback. This is an offense in Western Kentucky that's averaging 333 passing yards per game. They're only rushing for 66 yards on the ground, but Mike White has thrown for 24 touchdown passes this year. When you look at Georgia State from a defensive perspective, they're giving up 242 passing yards per game. Their quarterback, Connor Manning, he's a solid quarterback, but I think Western Kentucky could force an up-tempo offense, force Georgia State to match them score for score, and I like Georgia State here to get the victory. I like Western Kentucky to get the victory over Georgia State by 17 points or more. I just think the speed of Western Kentucky is the difference. They're the more complete offense, and they're be able to put pressure on Georgia State vertically. Western Kentucky with a 17-point win over Georgia State in this ballgame. Another intriguing battle is North Texas and Troy. To me, it does come down to quarterback Mason Fine. I like the way Mason Fine is played. Plus, it's a Conference USA Sun Belt matchup. To me, that's the difference. I give the edge to Conference USA. They won this bowl game last year. Southern Miss got the victory over the Raging Cajuns by 7 points. But from a quarterback perspective, I give the edge to Mason Fine over Brandon Silvers. You look at Troy overall, defensively holding opposing offenses to 116 rushing yards per game. They're also allowing over 200 passing yards per game, and I think that's where Fine can exploit their secondary. It's a high-octane offense in North Texas. When you look at it, they're averaging 291 passing yards per game. They're rushing the football for right around 176 yards on the ground. Fine has completed 66% of his passes, 28 touchdowns. I think North Texas gets the 7-point victory over Troy in this battle because of the speed perspective. I think they've played the tougher schedule. Don't look at that ball game against FAU. FAU is a solid team. It is a Conference USA opponent as opposed to a Sun Belt. I like North Texas in this battle to get the outright victory over Brandon Silvers and the crew. Another intriguing battle. We'll break it down. It is one of the semifinal games. It's Georgia and Oklahoma. Been very impressed with the way Kirby Smart is game plan with this team. It's a contrast in styles. Georgia's going to want to run the football to force Baker Mayfield and that offense on the sidelines. And Baker Mayfield and Oklahoma are going to look to force an up-tempo attack to force Jake Fromm to match them score for score. Couple of reasons why I like Georgia. I think from a secondary perspective, they could play man-to-man coverage against Oklahoma. I like their third down defense. They're holding opposing offenses to 30% on third down conversions. This is a very physical, heavy SEC offensive line that's averaging 265 rushing yards per game. And when you look at the staple of running backs that Georgia possesses, Sony Michel, Nick Chubb, Swift, and Holyfield, they're able to put pressure on opposing defenses, not just between the tackles, but in the short to intermediate passing game. You saw that in the SEC championship game. I think that's the matchup that you want to see play out going up against Oklahoma. I like Georgia here. When you look at Kirby Smart as well, I give him the advantage over first-year head coach Lincoln Riley. Kirby Smart has been under Nick Saban. He got his feet wet last year and won his bowl game last year against TCU and Gary Patterson. He showed an ability to game plan against a better, superior team. And to me, that's the difference, especially in rematch situations. When you see Kirby Smart in rematches from last year, 5-0, and has won those games by 31.5 points per game. To me, that's the difference. Offensive line and defensive line is the difference, coupled with the fact of, I go back to the West Virginia game for Oklahoma. When West Virginia rushed the football out of the Wildcat for 251 yards on the ground, to me, that was a cause of concern for Oklahoma. TCU in the championship game could not do it because they're a finesse offensive line. Georgia ran the Wildcat through much of the year with Sony Michel. Look for that to be a critical factor as well. That'll open up play action for Jake Fromm, and I'm calling for the Georgia double-digit win here. I think Georgia wins this game anywhere from 13 to 17 points and makes it to the national championship game over either Alabama or Clemson. We'll see who gets there. I like Clemson, though. When you break down the other semifinal game, to me it comes down to a couple of factors. It's the front seven of Clemson going up against Jalen Hurts and forcing him to make his reads and progressions in third down and long situations. When you look at Clemson, they're holding opposing offenses to right around 120 rushing yards per game. They're only giving up around 170 passing yards to opposing offenses. They've been able to force turnovers on the road or on a neutral field site this year. They're holding opposing offenses to right in the area of 27.5% on third downs. When you look at their ability as well to create sacks, Clemson does have over 40 total sacks on the year. When you look at Jalen Hurts this year, when teams have forced him into third down and long situations, he struggled because he doesn't have another go-to receiver outside of Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley leads Alabama with total receptions this year, 53 total receptions for 857 yards, 3 touchdowns. There's not another player on the team with 20 receiving touchdowns or more. That's a significant drop-off from last year when Alabama had guys like Ardarius Stewart, Garrett Dieter, and tight end O.J. Howard to force off double teams off of Calvin Ridley. They don't have that this year. They have a freshman wide receiver in Jerry Jeudy. That's not enough going up against Clemson's defense. To me, that's the difference. From Clemson's offense as well, from a personnel perspective, they have the ability, you've seen it over the last couple of years, to spread out Alabama's defense vertically. They can attack them vertically on seam routes and put pressure on the perimeter with a mobile quarterback in Kelly Bryant. When you look at Kelly Bryant this year, fantastic year. He's completing 66% of his passes, 13 passing touchdowns, but he's played well in the system. And he's been able to make plays when his team needs him the best. And I think offensive line, I give the edge to Clemson in this ballgame. They have the type of personnel with wide receivers like Deion Kane, Ray McLeod, Hunter Renfrow to really attack Alabama's defense vertically. That's the difference. Clemson with I think, a significant victory. Two touchdowns or more over Alabama. Don't think it's shocking. I think Clemson is the most complete team in the country, and Dabo Swinney is a big game head coach. He showed it now over the last 5 years. Give the man his due. Clemson and Georgia in the national championship game. If you want to get all the bowl selections, follow the TV and radio show every Saturday. Channel 262, Dish Network, or Fantasy Sports Radio and Television Network, Optimum, Cablevision, New York, New Jersey. Check it out. Or you could go to YouTube Live, FNTSY channel, College Football Today. Check it out next Saturday at 9 a.m. See you next week.